just to summarize, I think what we talked about in this panel so far, very different, four different views here. We looked at this, an industry view. We looked at, Leon talked about the various organizational issues there and the adoption issues there. And then we saw 3 excellent case studies on the SOA adoption. And I'll open it up for the discussion. Again, there are 2 mics there. Please come out. And
so I enjoyed the panel, and I have a couple of questions related with design and services and business modeling. So let me first lay out what I was getting from the panels. First, I like the Michael's example to demonstrate that business modeling is very useful, very needed for the companies, even for Intel, eBay, these kind of computing and heavy companies, and they even need business modeling. And so my question is related with these 2 questions. First question is, when Amazon is released their cloud, they are actually getting values by releasing that because they have a hardware infrastructure. Their application cannot consume all the computing power, so by releasing that, they get value. Now, if you look at analytics, to me, the sweet spot of analytics is the value part of the what kind of new value they can bring for the company, what kind of competitiveness they can bring for the company. Now, if we look at that, probably American Express, eBay, they will not want to release the part of the analytics that are so critical, so sweet for their company and for other competitors to use. But on the flip side, that business modeling, if you model a online auction, a lot of other online auction can utilize that from other countries, for example, China, Japan, Korea, India. So they can get business too, but they don't want to release the sweet part. So now the question is, do you have experience whether how to differentiate what part is sweet, what part is a common model that actually they could release, they can actually making money out of that, like Amazon's a hardware infrastructure?
So in my experience, what I'm seeing is that they're pretty happy about releasing aggregated data, summary data. And then from there you can build your own models if it's valuable enough, but not the model itself. And probably what's going to happen is the value-based contracts that I didn't get a chance to go into in too much depth will be the key. But how do you enforce those? So let's say I let you lease a model or rent a model, you use it and you make a bunch of money in sales. I want a cut, right? So how do we build that into the computational model is a real key. But that's why I said this is not your father's services computing. This one's going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how the modeling would tie to that, except that in the inter-organizational space, the models really come down to the contracts. And so if we can derive some models from contracts or go vice versa, that would be really interesting research.
Okay. What I'd like to do is to kind of generalize the question a little bit and then have the panel respond to that. And I think really the basic question you're raising here is really when you're taking your expertise and offering it as a service, okay? How do you protect its value, okay? How do you protect it from your competitors, and how do you protect its value? So you are really in some way releasing the value out of the expertise you already have, which may be the data, which could be the intelligence, which could be the analysis, but then how do you protect that? And Leon, you're
this is very important because for us, we want to provide analytics as a service.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't help company understand that aspect,
correct,
nobody going to open anything.
Yeah,
I think analytical service is computational. It's unique to special activities such as auction. But a lot of companies, they have their own information needs. That's very different. As far as analytical service, if you can, if your model is very similar or is standardized, or as long as company can use to promote their own value, I think you can make money. Yeah. But I'm not sure that's solved every company's problem. But from IBM or from cloud computing or utility information or a process at utility, that's definitely a business model you can make money.
Data is not been released very, there is not a lot of willingness to release data for analysis, maybe derivative data and whatnot, but not the raw data. And my question is, how do you think, is it sustainable? Like, given all the variability in service quality that clouds, let's say, offer. Like, I'm thinking from point of view of, let's say, even performance monitoring in the cloud, security in the cloud, those are kind of things. You go to Amazon and you rent the same type of configuration twice, and you have different machines, and they have different performance. So in the IT environment, what you want to have something that is really fixed and not changing, because this is how you make it run every day. In the cloud environment, it is not possible yet. So do you think a pressure from that kind of use case would make people open up the infrastructures and say, you know what, now you can actually at least understand what the statistical characteristics of those things you get, you will be able to model on top of it? Do you think it's going to happen? Or?
So my experience has been it happens when a company doesn't want to invest to cover peak demand. So they're more willing to consider the trade-offs of going outside, I think I'm getting this right, and release more information if they feel that the savings in their infrastructure can be made by not building everything like an engineer to way over what the demands might be. But even when they do that, they make decisions as to what is more commodity that can be released. So they keep, like, the data that's critical to their mission, they keep inside. They just don't share it. When I was doing research on the contracts about data streaming and sharing, the best exemplars I could find were universities who had research contracts that we sign when we get data or we develop data, and that's been the best source to really see kind of how the companies are playing it out. But it is going to be a big business issue, and I'm not sure how it will play out exactly.
Is in some way overcapacity, providing it as overcapacity is to be play safe, because the hardware and those things are a little bit cheaper, are relatively cheap. So they kind of, instead of taking the risk, and they just kind of over provisioning it so they can take care of these variations and spikes in the demand in some way. Anybody else have comments?
I'll just make one more quick follow-up. I met a guy from Sun before it folded into Oracle, and he was really smart. He said they were pricing out services computing, and the people had figured out how to track when the prices were cheap because it was a dynamic pricing model. So the companies that were provisioning with them were keeping track of how much they were using. So they started keeping track of what companies were coming in when, and then they sort of gamed their own intelligence on the other end. So I'm not sure where that cycle ends.
Hey, my name is Karen Becker from University of Southern Brazil. And someone has mentioned that we needed to create mutual understanding of the value co-production between service providers and receivers. So how do we do that when faced with large-scale usage? I'm a provider. I want to have massive usage of my services. Like eBay, for example, which was mentioned here. We have different uses of those services. And if I add time on that, trying to please new customers or getting new customers without breaking the one. So what's in your vision as the way to create this value, this idea of how to co-create the value in terms of large-scale usage?
In terms of co-production of value, it's really about who will do the modeling. Let's say company have information. The business service providers could work with the business people to co-create the model. You don't have to start from scratch. Right? If you have many customers, their models may be similar. So that's what I'm talking about when you talk about co-production value. is that who will be responsible for the modeling, and in the end, who will own the model. Okay. So that's definitely co-creation. Yeah. This idea is actually from marketing, co-creation value. If you think about, you buy a car, nowadays you can design your own car. If your design is very popular, who gets benefit from the model? Right? As far as how to do that, I think we have to figure it out. Yeah. But in terms of the process, it is clear to me.
Yeah, I think I just want to add to that. Lian's comment is actually to the question of how to create it. Actually, there is many complex and motivational psychological questions get into that. Again, there's fair amount of research, and I think a good model to think about that is an open source model. See, there are different characteristics and different things which motivate people to aid to these things. So if they kind of really likes and develop loyalty to the eBay, for example, in this case, they will be more than willing to help improve that. And because they are a major user of it, it also helps them improve it, and they'll help them use it. And so those kind of motivational characteristics helps. And so company has to really position those in a very nice way, or in some motivational way, to encourage people to do that. That's kind of a
Hi, I'm Muninder Singh from NC State University. I have maybe a partially tangential question, but I'll ask it of Mike and M.G.P.L. in particular. And this is based on my interest, long-term interest in trying to come up with abstractions which are, fully technical abstractions and yet have business realism. So I'm interested in notions of contracts and so forth that you alluded to. But the question is, what kinds of elements of such abstractions do you foresee as proving to be the most valuable in terms of constructing models that might lead to just better models and better adoption?
The one I have shown, the cybernetic model. In fact, what we have taken there is the keywords and key phrases that are mostly communicated in the literature, in journals and things of that nature, to discuss a scenario kind of things. Or a bunch of those literature that you study, you come up with a very important keyword, something like that, what I have shown. So it is not about the contracts, it's more about the influencing factors, how one is influencing the other. And more important thing in the study of the cybernetics is the study of the feedback, how the reinforcing is taking place, and how the various things are getting accumulated. Important thing to understand is that what may start as a very simple intervention very soon gets into very complicated things because of these interventions, over and over reinforcing those kind of things. That is what we are seeing, that years back maybe it was an isolated way we were looking all of these things, but we are seeing the integrated nature of the cloud and social and mobility, and also the other things are coming, big data, big analytics and whatnot. So that is the way we go about studying these kind of models. Hope I answered your question.
Yeah, partly, but I think the kinds of circumstances you describe or the approaches you describe, they fundamentally lead to emergent phenomena which might be difficult to predict and deal with, so that I think would be a challenge. But let me also hear Michael's response.
Yeah.
I think there's different levels, and I was kind of considering the co-creation question in this context too. At the individual level, a service encounter between you and your doctor, I don't know if you guys have ever done it, but I've lied to the doctor. Now, how stupid is that? Right? But our basic psychological behavior in co-creation is something that is an abstraction that's there. When you go, though, to this service network level, and it's a B2B context, now there's the interesting ones, I think, to abstract from. And I'm not an economist. I like to dabble in reading what they're doing. But I think that's where some of the abstractions can come from. So things like a free rider, imperfect contracts, value-based contracts versus fixed fee, and what you might get from each of those in terms of the types of behaviors that you want to enforce in that network to get business value for everyone?
I have a broadband at home. I got the contract, say, 5 meg transmission rate. But look at the real transmission rate, often like a 2 meg, 1 meg, or blah, 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 those type of thing. I try to fight against the company. I say, hey, well, I should get the 5 meg. That's the service level agreement I got. And but I don't get much protection. Now, in the service-oriented, the let's say cloud service, those type of things, do you think the business is going to change the practice to give consumer more protection and so on?
I don't know exactly. Just the service orientation will do that, actually. I think it's really more of, I think, as earlier we talked about, is the contract and the enforcement of the contract and the monitoring mechanisms. Okay, I think one of the reasons that many times they promised you 5 meg and you get a 2 meg speed, that you don't really have a continuous monitoring scheme. Okay, so the only time your response slows down, you get irritated, but you don't know whether the response is slow because your internet speed is slow or the website you're trying to access is slow. And so there is really not a clear monitoring mechanisms that way so that you can quickly take an action on that. So sometimes really the improvement in the service level will only happen with these 3 ingredients: the monitoring, the contract enforcements, and the contract itself. And so that's kind of what my thinking is on that.
I'm Michael Liu from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The panel is titled as Adopting Service Computing for a Balanced Act. But I don't see a balanced act here. What I heard is a lot of things are coming from the business side rather than the technology side. I think Leon mentioned it very well that service provider has the cloud service provider and business service provider. I myself is coming from the technology side. And there's a mismatch I can see here is that from the technology side, we like to do the things in a horizontal integration way in order to bring 2 parties together. We try to have a layered approach. We specify, we emphasize on the generosity so that we can provide system architecture that can be shared. And that's why how you see the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS coming along, because these are very generic architecture from the system point of view. But I can see that from the business point of view, it's kind of difficult because a lot of examples cited over here are very much vertical integration. That, for example, Starbucks is very familiar with the business. That's why they can come up with this neat solution. And the other example are pretty much because of the business know-how to drive it. And once you, in other words, there's a specificity over there. But once we are talking about generosity, then people are not willing to share data. And there's a lot of result that the core technology are being kept. In other words, in the business orientation kind of thing, vertical integration is inevitable. But from the technology side, we try to do the horizontal integration, and a lot of information can be shared because they are related to system. They are not related to the critical business data. So I like to just see that how can we, eventually we are adopting try to adopt the service computing, which includes the business as well as the technology, and how can we make it really integrated together so that it's not just the business side of vertical integration, but eventually horizontal integration is how it will work at the end. I'd like to hear the comments from the panelists.
3 of us from business school, and most of you are from computer science. Very good question. I think the answer is embedded in your questions. I think the cloud service providers will do the horizontal things, and the business service providers will do the vertical things. And hopefully we'll find a way that the cloud service providers will interface with all the vertical service providers, so that we'll try to scale up as much as possible. And so that's what I see.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent question, and I think that's one of the reasons really we have this forum, I think this conference. I think this conference is in some way unique, is trying to make an effort to bridge that gap between the business and the technology. because I think that's a very, very important, because the technology, without looking at the business implications of that and just developing a technology, isn't going to succeed. And on the other hand, the business is not going to succeed without understanding the technology which go behind that. And I think a forum like this, and especially that new conference which started, which is the AC conference, and the special issue of the journal, is really an effort in that direction. And I'll encourage you to actually collaborate and cooperate with a business faculty, maybe in your school, to address some of those issues. I think that will aid the tremendous value to that. Mike, you have a comment? Go ahead.
You know, I was just going to say, the one kind of key thing behind services computing that I was so excited about from the beginning, it has a market orientation. And I think embedded in your question is that business responds to how markets move. So if you take an American Express, there's a reason that they have, in a room of 7, 4 people that are outsourced, because they're very agile. Their whole business model shifts. Some people don't know whether they're going to work there tomorrow because they move and shift and align things differently in order to get the best performance from their systems and their people. It's a little scary, but that's the way it is. Intel, on the other hand, really saw that stack going up and down, and that they wanted to keep control of all those processes. Well, there's a reason that, you know, building the chips and the manufacturing processes, that probably requires that level of scrutiny. So I have this faith that markets kind of work. It may take some time, but I think that it will balance out.
And we'll end the panel. The panelists will be around here, so if you want to personally talk to each one of us one way or the other, please feel free to come up and talk to us. Thank you very much.